This is part 8 of Orangina, my build for the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. And today we're going to be finishing the guitar and stringing it. I have to. If you do want to go back to the beginning, I'll link it up there. And there's also a video of the full build without my blabbering. So come and join me. Let's build a guitar. Hi, I'm Yoav and this is the Electric Luthier in the 8th part of my Orangina build. Today we'll start going through the steps of wet sanding and polishing, making a nut, soldering, and final assembly. After about 6 coats of clear polyurethane with at least 24 hours between them, I left them to cure for about a week. I find that polyurethane never really hardens as much as I would like it to, but the deadline was getting close and it's time for polishing. You can see a nice thick shiny layer of clear coat, and you can also clearly see the orange peel texture created by the relatively big droplets my spray gun has created. It's time to start wet sanding. I'm going to start with 1000 grit and go through 1500 to 2000. The most extensive work will be done with the 1000, as I'm trying to sand the orange peel bumps down to be left with a perfectly smooth surface, which I can then refine with the higher grits and then buff back to a shine. There's a fine balance of managing to sand enough so it's smooth, but not too much, because we really don't want to sand through the clear coat and into the color layer. 600 or 800 grit would probably get me there a lot faster, but will also be more susceptible to oversanding. I will be using both sponges and paper, although I generally prefer the sponges. They give a better feel and never have any hard edges. Wet sanding creates a kind of slurry mess of sanding and the surface residue, which seems to lubricate the process, and the water also helps the high grit from clogging too quickly. I go area by area, sand it, and wipe it off until it's smooth enough. Check it against the light and repeat. The 1800 to 2000 grit sponge will give the final round of sanding, and I'll thoroughly clean off all the leftover slushiness. The neck will receive the same treatment. I know it had a layer or two less, although I layered it pretty thick on the neck and especially the shiny headstock. There's a good chance the neck itself will be matted down after buffing for a smoother and less clingy feel polished necks may have. I have this buffing kit that has pads with varying degrees of hardness up to the final furry one. It also has a bass drum with a drill attachment, but as I have speed control on my orbital sander and it's a perfect fit, I'll go with that. I select a rougher orange, a medium green, and the white fuzzy one. I'll be using a light to medium turtle polishing compound. I start by rubbing a generous amount of compound onto the surface and then wiping the excess off. I'll start with the orange pad. A fast turning pad with light pressure seems to work the best. Hard pressure will also stop the rotation and leave just the vibrating, which doesn't do much here. A little spritz of water goes a long way to smooth the process and also remove any dried compound. I'll repeat this with the green pad. I also tried dabbing the pad itself and working it in, but it doesn't seem to be any better and doesn't feel as even. It's really giving a nice sheen. I repeat the same process a third time and give a long, thorough buffing with a white furry pad. Maybe I should have opted for the finer compound for the final buffing. These work like ultrafine sanding, not to confuse with wax, which gives another coat which I'm not sure you want on your guitar. Again, the neck will get the same treatment. 3 layers of polish compound and going between them with the rough orange, the medium green, and the final white buffer. It is finally time to start assembly. Before I connect the neck, I want to put the machine heads or tuners on. The holes are full of paint and compound, and I use a rimmer to clean and whiten them just enough for easy insertion. I'm doing this from the back only, and it's enough. I really didn't want to drill them and risk chipping. I ordered a set of Korean 3 and 4 professional locking tuners. You don't want to go for the amateur stuff. I find the tuners are a bit like USB connectors. You always put it the wrong way before you put it the right way. Well, unless it's 6 in a row. I tighten and align the tuners. Those little screws at the back are really just an extra measure to counter the rotation against the string tension. I like to drill for these little ones with a manual drill to avoid over drilling. I also wax them when screwing in to maintain the balance between keeping a tight fit, not stripping the holes, and not breaking the screw. I've had all these happen before, so I love the way these headstocks fit the 7 tuners. The backstring furls are now hammered in. I wanted them to be slightly indented, and I hammered them in using a large nail to push from the inner side and avoid the edges. Time to bolt the neck. I've got a good fit, no wiggle, and I can actually lift it holding the neck alone. I mark the holes with a manual drill and then take it into the drill press. The washers are already there. I use the same caution I had with the small screws for the headstock for these large ones and wax for a smooth yet tight fit. With all these sculpted backs, you can easily drill or screw too far and come out from the front side. I actually had to find a replacement screw for the shorter one. Now we have something that looks like a guitar. Let's make a nut. I was looking for a black material and ended up with a fiberglass, which is similar in feel to carbon, but I think just slightly softer. The 7 strings and multi-scale is both longer than a standard and has an angle that has to be customized. There's no trick here. I start by cutting it to the general dimensions and slowly sand it to the correct shape. I use a box cutter blade to scribe the height of the frets as you would do with a half pencil on light colored nuts. This will give me an indication for both the shape and the maximum depth I might later make the slots. When the shape is done, I'll sand the nut up to 2000 grit to give it a nice smooth sheen. And there you go, a perfect fitting nut. Now I want to have a couple of strings on before I slot the nut, so I'll need to install my bridge. Since it was positioned and pre-drilled, I just need to go back and clean those holes from the paint filler and polish, and again I use my hand drill for no particular reason. Then it's just 14 screws to run in. Since the strings run through the body, there's actually very little stress on these screws. While I'm here, I'll also fit the pickups. The original screws were made for a pickguard mounted guitar, so I need screws which are long enough to hold the pickups at the correct height, but will not come out the back. I use the original springs, and after blackening the heads of the screws, I carefully pre-drill them and mount both pickups. Stringing the two highest and lowest strings, in this case the high E and the low B, will help me position the nut and will also show you exactly how well the neck and bridge are aligned. I put a couple of old strings just for reference. I don't really need them tuned. I use a plastic 7-string nut that has a different angle just for reference and to hold the strings in place. I then measure 2.5 millimeters or just under 1/8 of an inch from each end and mark the position for the two highest and lowest strings. I use a string spacing ruler to then mark the position of all the other strings. This ruler takes into account the thickness of the strings and spaces them evenly, and it works just as well for 7 strings. I first mark them with a Sharpie, but then I use another ruler and make parallel scribes with a scalpel blade. It's more accurate and will give me a good start for slotting. I glue the nut with a couple of super glue dots. It's not like it's going anywhere, and for intonation purposes, I'll wick some more in when I'm all done. I start by marking the slots with a single-size very sharp file, and then use the individual files for the corresponding strings. This is not the final slotting. I'll fine-tune it later when I set it up. But I do want to have action that is at least playable. Next, it's soldering. I try and do as much as I can outside the body. It's safer and more comfortable. A cardboard box provides a great custom holder for the 2 pots and the 3-way switch. The original Abassi is very modest with a single volume pot, but I decided to go with a Tele-style volume and tone. For all of you who are electronically challenged like myself and need to carefully study the wiring diagram every time, I highly recommend the Seymour Duncan website. They have diagrams you can download for pretty much any combination and variation you can imagine, and some I couldn't. After I connect the pots and the switch and leave long wires for the jack, I mount them into the control cavity and connect the 2 hot wires from the pickups to the switch and the ground to the pot. The jack is also connected, and let's not forget the bridge ground. The Strat style jack plate is connected with 2 little screws, and after that, it's time to close the cover on the controls. I have a whole pack of these little screws. They always come in handy. Standard black strap buttons are the last parts of the back, and then I flip it to give the pots and the switch their covers. I go through the knocking on metal test to see that the electronics actually respond, and then it's time to whip out this set of 7-string D'Addarios, which have been waiting for a long time. These professional locking tuners really make stringing and tuning a fun job. And fairly quick too. That's it. We have a fully functional 7-string multi-scale guitar. For now, you'll have to take my word for it, but there is a demo coming up, as well as an everything that went wrong in the build video. If you found this helpful, please comment, like, and subscribe. I've linked some of the tools and parts I used, as well as guitar building articles from my website, theelectricluthier.com. There are also plenty more videos on my channel, and until next time, go ahead, build a guitar.